Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Glendale Special Transportation and Parking Commission meeting. Am I echoing? No. Fine? Sounds strange.
A little bit.
Now that's better. My name is Shauna Monson. I'm the chairperson for the Glendale Transportation and Parking Commission, and I would like to read the following statement. For public comments and questions during the meeting, please do call 818-937-8100. City staff will be submitting these questions and comments in real time to the appropriate person during this meeting. And with that, I'm calling this meeting to order at 6:06 p.m. May we have roll call?
I'll take roll call. Chairperson Bonstein.
Present.
Commissioner Lester.
Here.
Commissioner Amirian.
Here.
Commissioner Ordubegyan.
Here.
Commissioner Avagyan.
Present.
Thank you.
Commissioner Avgyan will be participating remotely from the Yerevan Ride office located at 51 Orbeli Street in Yerevan, Armenia. Welcome from abroad. What is the next item on the agenda? Oh, I'm sorry, I interrupted you. Go ahead.
No, just was saying hi.
It's only a half a second delay. It's incredible. What is the next item on the agenda, please?
Flag salute.
Yes.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The next item on the agenda, please.
Item 2, posting of the agenda. The agenda for the Monday, August 21, 2023 special meeting of the Glendale Transportation and Parking Commission was posted by August 16, 2023 before 5 p.m. on the bulletin board outside of City Hall. The agenda was also posted by Commissioner Avagyan in Yerevan, Armenia, outside of the Yerevan Ride office entrance located at 51 Orbeli Street.
Excellent. Next item on the agenda, please.
Item 3, approval of minutes. Approval of minutes for the regular Transportation and Parking Commission meeting of July 24, 2023.
If there are no comments or questions, do I have a motion approving the minutes of July 24th, 2023?
I move to approve the minutes.
Excellent. Can I have a second?
I'll second it.
I'll take roll call. Chairperson Bonstein.
Yes.
Commissioner Lester.
Yes.
Commissioner Ordubegyan.
Yes.
Commissioner Avagyan. Commissioner Amirian.
Yes.
Thank you.
The next item for me is to turn the mic on. And then what is the next item on the agenda?
Item 4, presentations. There are no presentations for this meeting.
Thank you. And the next item on the agenda?
Item 5, consent items. We do not have any consent items at this time.
And the next item on the agenda?
Item 6, action items. San Fernando Road Beautification Project. Motion recommending the implementation of Alternative 1 for the San Fernando Road Beautification Project.
Mr. Amrani, will you please introduce the action item?
Be happy to. Thank you very much, and good evening, Madam Chair, members of the Commission. This is an item before you about a grant that we received on the San Fernando for making improvements to the San Fernando corridor, a certain section of it, and it's called the San Fernando Road Beautification Project. We had retained a consultant, Mark Thomas and Associates, to do a study for us, and we have their representative, Mr. Pat Somerville, who's going to do a short presentation on this project and the alternatives and the recommendations. So I'll turn it over to Mr. Somerville.
Good evening, Chairperson, Commissioners. Pat Somerville with Mark Thomas and Company. We did prepare the alternatives analysis and conducted the outreach for this project, and want to walk you through the presentation of the work done to date and the recommendation. So the project's intent is the beautification, the evaluation of multimodal improvements, and delivery of environmental friendly and sustainable solutions through the corridor. This includes planting through median islands in the parkway, improved facilities for pedestrians and transit users such as benches and ADA compliant bus stops, and providing shelters, and additional beautification efforts through the corridor, including new fencing along the rail corridor, as well as stormwater improvements. The project's funded through a number of sources, including Measure W Municipal Return Fund, the state gas tax, but the bulk of the funding is coming through the Clean California Grant Program, which is nearly $5 million that was awarded to the city. The planned construction start date is late 2023. The important item to note here is that the Clean California Grant does come with a hard deadline of completion of construction by June of 2024. So that is a key element as we look at the alternatives. A little bit more about the Clean California Grant. The intent and the goal of the program was to reduce waste and debris in the public rights-of-way, to beautify and improve the public spaces to mitigate urban heat island effects, and to enhance the public health, the connection to the community, placemaking, and advance equity for the underserved communities. So a little bit about the existing conditions along San Fernando Road, and we're looking at the segment from Elk Avenue up to Grandview Avenue. It's a major arterial highway per the general plan designation. It's primarily a commercial corridor with businesses lining the east side. On the west side is the railroad corridor, which provides a constraint on that side of the corridor. Anything that would involve impact or impacting the intersections or traffic signals at any of the ACRAID crossings requires a process that doesn't fit within our overall project schedule. Also noting that the city's 2012 Bicycle Master Plan did note a Class 1 facility inside of the railroad right-of-way. Currently, that's not an available option with the proposed high-speed rail coming through the corridor. What's really limiting here is the 62-foot width from curb to curb. Currently, it's fully allocated with 2 vehicular lanes in each direction, on-street parking along the east side, a painted median with left turn lanes at each of the intersections. It's supposed to speed to 35 with daily traffic volumes of 22,000 to 24,000 vehicles per day along the corridor. This is an exercise of looking at the space allocation within that 62 feet and trying to fit as many of the amenities as we are able to within that corridor. On each of the alternatives, there are certain features that are included in each of them. This includes parkway planting on both sides along the rail corridor, as well as creating new planting along the parkway on the east side. Curb extensions at each of the intersections to shorten the distance for pedestrians as a safety improvement. Enhance crosswalks to improve visibility. Landscaped median islands through locations throughout the corridor. Upgrading bus stops, making them ADA compliant, providing shelters and shade for the users, and resurfacing of the pavement throughout the corridor. It's important to note that all the alternatives will maintain the left turn lanes at each of the intersections. So let's jump into alternative 1. Alternative 1 maintains the existing lane configuration. It would implement a Class 3 signed bikeway through the corridor. Maintains the 2 lanes in each direction, maintains the on-street parking on the east side of the roadway. There's no change in the lane configuration, no impacts to emergency operations. Alternative 2 This alternative provides Class 2 bike lanes on each side of San Fernando Road, and it accomplishes that by removing the parking lane. Again, this goes back to the space allocation within the 62 feet. In order to fit the bike lanes, this alternative would remove the on-street parking. It's approximately 141 stalls between Elk Avenue and Grandview along that east side that serves the businesses along the corridor. It's noted that this is a highly traveled corridor, commercial uses, trucks, et cetera. This would just be a 5-foot bike lane, no adjacent buffer to the bike lane, to the lane of travel. Stemming from community input, we developed a variation of Alternative 2 referred to as Alternative 2A. And this was a direct result of how do we maintain parking at the same point in time, because it's acknowledged the impact that that might have. So in order to maintain the parking on the east side, what this alternative does is reduces the rest of the lane widths and the median width to allow for a southbound only Class 2 bike lane. One of the issues with the solution is there is no return northbound striped Class 2 bike lane. It would be a Class 3 in the northbound direction. Alternative 3, this one provides Class 4 protected bikeways. This would be a striped bike lane with a buffer with vertical elements separating the cyclist from the vehicles. This would reduce San Fernando Road down to 1 lane in each direction for travel. There would be the raised median and left turn lanes at the intersections. There is a reduction in parking, about a 30% reduction from the 141 stalls. We lose approximately 44 because of the striping configuration. There is a net reduction in vehicle miles traveled, the VMT, of about 0.48%. One of the challenges with this alternative is the impact to the first responders. Because of the narrowed lane width and the single lane in each direction, that's bounded by a median, parking, or the protected bike lane. Similarly to Alternative 2, based on feedback received from the community, looking at the impacts surrounding traffic in Alternative 3 and the loss of 30% of the parking, we came up with a variation referred to as Alternative 3A. This would provide a 2-way cycle track protected on the west side of San Fernando Road. It restores all of the parking along the east curb line, and it restores 2 lanes of travel in the northbound direction. This would reduce the southbound direction still to 1 lane. This does have a VMT reduction of about 0.31%, but the challenge here is this solution would impact each of the traffic signals at each of the at-grade crossings, which kicks in a whole different review cycle with the California Public Utilities Commission, Metro, and MetroLink for those approvals. It is a process that would not fit within the timeline that we have to deliver this project in construction. Additionally, first responders still have the challenge in the southbound direction of the narrowed width of the street. So on the VMT analysis, as I noted, Alternatives 3 and 3A did have a decrease in VMT for the San Fernando Road corridor. At the same time, it did increase the VMT on surrounding streets due to the reduction in number of lanes leads to cut through or bypass traffic utilizing other corridors, particularly through the Pelanconi neighborhood using Fairmont Avenue, Concord, Glen Oaks, and Pacific Avenue. It's also noted that Metro does have the BRT project that will be forthcoming on Glen Oaks Boulevard, which will convert one of those lanes to a bus lane only. We also looked at the corridor travel time and the impact to the level of service at the intersection for those intersection operations through the corridor. Alternatives 1 and 2 is primarily status quo in terms of the level of service and travel times. Alternative 3 effectively doubles the afternoon, the PM peak hour travel times from 10 minutes to 20 minutes southbound and 18 minutes northbound. There is a decrease in level of service at the intersections for the intersection operations. Alternative 3A eliminates or reduces the northbound impact, but the southbound travel time impact still remains and still has a negative impact on the intersection level of service. We also did look at the traffic safety elements through the corridor. Again, looking at collision data from 2012 to 2022 from Elk Avenue to Grandview Avenue. There's a total of 361 accidents reported, 18 of which involved pedestrians and or cyclists through the project corridor. There's 8 pedestrian, 10 bicycle. There's a couple of clusters on Colorado Street as well as at California Avenue. It should be noted through the Caltrans Highway Safety Manual that the raised medians themselves, where they're being installed, does reduce collisions up to 25% at those locations. We also looked at the parking utilization along the corridor. We conducted 2 studies on March 9th and on April 6th. There is approximately 141 parking stalls along the east side of the corridor. This does account for red, green, and yellow painted curbs. As we can see, during the typical business hours, 7 or 8 a.m. through about 6 p.m., the parking is highly utilized, particularly north of the 134. We also looked at the side streets, looking at approximately 250 feet from San Fernando Road, looking at 3 different segments along the corridor and understanding the utilization of the side streets. This is an effort if parking was removed on San Fernando Road, do they have somewhere to go and somewhere to park? What this tells us, especially north of the 134 freeway, there is not enough available parking to displace the parking on San Fernando Road. The team also understands the importance of the community engagement aspect of the project. There was a tremendous amount of outreach done through this process, as outlined on this page, and I'm going to walk you through some of those items. In terms of notifications, there were email blasts that went out to stakeholders. There were 5 of them during about a 6-week period back in February, March. Over 5,000 door hangers were distributed to businesses in adjacent neighborhoods, and that was done twice. Postcards were mailed. Social media campaigns on both Facebook and Instagram, which reached 14,000 to 15,000 users respectively, and these notifications were all multilingual. The first survey that was conducted was really a fact-finding mission. It was to understand what the community saw as the top challenges through the corridor, as well as what their top improvements desired were. And what was found is the top 4 and the top challenges were all traffic-related, traffic operations related, congestion, waiting for the trains, for left turns, long waits at signals. Not surprisingly, the top improvement was related to the roadway traffic side of things for improvements through the corridor, followed by corridor beautification and pedestrian improvements. So based off of that survey, the alternatives were developed to each trying to address these to the greatest extent possible. And we then, at that point, conducted an open house that was held in March at the Glendale Fire Protection Bureau. 40 stakeholders participated. It was great to have the dialogue looking hands-on at the alternatives at this event. We did receive 6 written comments, 53 sticky pads. Each participant could write their own comments down, put it onto the exhibits that were out there at the event. So following that, we conducted survey number 2. So this was really to go out and go, well, here are the 3 alternatives that are being considered. Tell us what you think. The key themes that came back on the written comments were to prioritize public transit, pedestrian, and cyclist safety. There was support for beautification with the medians and parkways, and cautioning against the loss of parking, increased travel time, and diversion of traffic through neighborhoods. It's worth pointing out that of the respondents, 38% did select as active cyclist, compared to 11% that either work or own a business along San Fernando Road. The results of the survey, with 171 participants, alternative number 3 with the protected bike lanes had the highest approval rating at 55%, followed by alternative 2 with the class 2 bike lanes at 40%, followed by alternative 1, which provided only class 3 bike lanes. Following that survey, the team went out and did door-to-door canvassing. We walked the corridor, talked to each of the businesses, was done on Wednesday, June 7th, and then 2 days reaching out to the residents on Friday, June 9th, and Saturday, June 10th. The door-to-door canvassing, the summaries from the themes that we heard from the business community was the elimination of parking was a non-starter for them. The number of businesses are solely reliant on it, and that parking is already limited for their employees and customers. On the residential summary, the concerns were about elimination of street parking and how that would affect their neighborhoods. The potential for cut-through traffic with the lane reduction could make it unsafe for kids, and to keep San Fernando Road as is with beautification improvements. So that's the feedback that we received from the residential community. The results of that survey through this door-to-door canvassing, the business community ranked alternative 1 the highest at 93%, followed by alternative 2 and then alternative 3. Similarly, the residential summary had alternative 1 ranked the highest at 78%, alternative 2 at 21%, followed by alternative 3. Visually, looking at the three surveys that were done and looking at a cumulative, 51% of the respondents were in favor of alternative 1, 25% in favor of alternative 2, and 24% for alternative 3. Just a note, survey 1 didn't include any introduction of alternatives, so there's no voting that came in on alternatives as part of survey 1. So quick summary of the alternatives. Again, alternative 1 accomplishes the main goals of the project. Maintains that crucial transportation corridor and emergency response link for the first responders, preserves the on-street parking, and it did receive the highest support from the neighborhood residents as well as businesses. Alternative 2 and 2A were not in favor from the businesses or neighboring residents due to the elimination of on-street parking, and alternative 2 particularly. Transfers the on-street parking needs to side streets. Alternative 2A, though, does maintain parking but eliminates northbound, kind of a return path in a class 2 bike lane. It would be class 3. Then alternative 3 and 3A, it provides the protected bicycle facility, but it results in cut-through traffic and decrease in corridor service levels. It does require the PUC and Metrolink approvals, which won't fit in the time frame provided by the grant. And the corridor businesses and neighboring residents were not in favor of this alternative. And again, the first responders and the fire department in particular were not in support of this alternative. So the key considerations, the key takeaways from this: the right-of-way constraints don't allow for an additional feature within the street section. To be able to provide the 2 lanes, parking, and class 2 bike lanes at a minimum won't fit in the given corridor. We don't have the ability to widen the street towards the rail corridor, nor can we widen towards the businesses due to the overhead utilities and the other underground utilities in the parkway. It's not an ideal condition for cyclists due to the heavily traveled commercial corridor that this is. And there are considerable concerns from the businesses and residents and first responders to the alternatives that would eliminate a lane of traffic or the parking. Based on these considerations, the recommendation to staff and for your consideration is alternative 1. It is the most efficient in achieving the project and grant goals and the delivery of that on the timeline. It maintains the crucial transportation operations, including the first responders. It is supported by the corridor businesses and neighboring residents. And we do recommend consideration of alternative parallel routes as part of your bicycle transportation plan update that is ongoing. With that, that concludes my presentation, and we'll open up for any questions.
Thank you very much. At this point, I guess I'll see if the board has any clarifying questions in regard to the presentation. I imagine we also have members of the public that will be interested in giving feedback as well. Does anyone have clarifying questions? Eli?
Yes, please. Thank you. Thanks for the presentation. One thing I wasn't clear on is who received a survey that talked about 2A?
So alternatives 2A and 3A came after the outreach efforts on the project. It was taking in feedback received from the community and how could we best address it, look at it, see the pros and cons of each alternative. So alternatives 2A and 3A were not returned back to the community. It was a byproduct of the feedback we received from the community.
Okay, yeah, I just wondered because it was just characterized as if that was sort of included with the survey, but it sounds like it was not. The community did not weigh in on 2A. My other question is basically like time for modifications. It's been highlighted in this case that we are up against a deadline, and I'm just wondering how much leeway there is if design has in fact been started.
Commissioner Lester, I'm going to ask Sarkis Oganessian to come up and talk about the background on that issue.
Good evening. Commissioner Lester, so in regards to the Clean California grant that has that hard deadline of June 30th, 2024, we received that grant in early 2022, January 31st, 2022. We then received, we applied for that grant of January 31st in 2022. We received confirmation that we received that grant in May of 2022. And we didn't receive a notice to proceed from the actual state agency, which is Caltrans, to proceed with alternatives and design until September of 2022. At that time, we were able to go to council to select a consultant, award a contract, and we expedited the contract approval process, and we were able to get a notice to proceed to Mark Thomas in February of 2022. 2023, my apologies. Going back in time. So then we immediately proceeded with the first community survey that Pat discussed in February. On February 15, 2023 was when it went to the public. And that proceeded with additional surveys at the community open house. And the draft traffic study was received by our staff in May of 2023. And then that followed the second community survey, comments on that study, the door-to-door canvassing, and we're basically here before you today to present the alternatives that have come up as a result of the traffic study, as a result of the outreach efforts to then get direction on the preferred alternative that staff is recommending, alternative 1, so that we can proceed to 60% design documents. According to Mark Thomas and their commitment to the city through their contract, 60% design documents will be progressed to 100% design documents if we have approval to proceed both tonight and following council presentation after the TPC's recommendation. We should have 100% plans ready to advertise by November of this year, which means we'll be able to begin construction no later than January of 2024, and we have approximately a 6-month construction timeline.
If I can, just one more, thanks. So at the beginning of the information associated with this issue, it says that all of the proposals were proposed for land that is part of the city of Glendale. And I'm interested to know that seems to include the planted space between the curb and the UP right-of-way, which is being proposed to be planted. Who controls that space in relationship to this project?
Are you talking about the right-of-way between the curb and the railroad fence on the west side of the corridor or the south side, depending on how you're looking at it?
West side, yeah.
So the city of Glendale has a 3 to 3.5 foot right-of-way. It varies. And we will be controlling the fencing. We will be controlling the planting as well as the maintenance of anything that is installed in that right-of-way. We do that now, and we will continue to do that after this project.
Thanks.
Are there other clarifying questions, please?
Just a quick question. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Ms. Avakian. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Mr. Dubikin.
Quick question regarding construction timelines. Are there any differences between the alternatives in terms of how long construction will take?
They would all be similar in duration for construction.
That's the only clarifying question I have at this time. Thank you.
Commissioner Avagian?
Yes, I think my voice comes with a delay, so I want to make sure that it's not overcoming with anyone's questions. Okay, so I have a questions regarding the grant conditions. Since the grant was awarded when the city actually planned to have the bike lanes with class 1 bike lanes, and then now both alternative 1 and alternative 2 are different types of bike paths. I'm trying to understand whether there are going to be any issues, potential problems with the implementation of the alternative 1 and alternative 2.
Commissioner Avakian, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, perfect. So, no, when the city applied for this grant, there was no alternative chosen at that time. The main goal of this grant and of this project was to beautify the corridor, as outlined in the Clean California grant requirements. We embarked on this effort because, like we do on all of our capital improvement project efforts, where we study multimodal active transportation improvements on all of our projects. And so knowing that, that's what we did.
I think maybe your question was what we were talking about earlier, Commissioner Avagian, was in the bicycle transportation plan from 2012, there was a recommendation for installing a bike path within the railroad right-of-way. So that was the recommendation. And then, as Mr. Somerville mentioned, because of the high-speed rail coming through the city, that alternative is no longer available to us. So we had to look within the right-of-way, the street right-of-way, for installation of the bike lanes.
Thank you for clarification, Mr. Yazdan. I have another question too then, and thank you. In this case, if there was a recommendation, but still there was no specific alternative that was presented when the grant was being awarded, then my question is, for alternative 2A, is there any conflict with the high rail project is there any conflict currently?
Commissioner, there would not be a conflict between alternative 2A and the proposed California high-speed rail. That would stay within the rail corridor itself.
Okay. And then my other question would be, in the written report nor verbally, I have not really heard any disadvantages of 2A alternative. Could you please clarify why is the city recommendation goes towards more alternative 1 versus alternative 2A?
So Commissioner, with alternative 2A, there are benefits, of course, with it, with the maintaining the parking. The disadvantage is the narrowed lanes as well as just a directional striped Class 2 bike lane on the corridor. A lot of times when we work on and looking at active transportation projects, we're looking at the highest and the best use, be able to encourage the use of the proposed facilities to try to garner the most users possible for it. Again, with the traffic volumes, the commercial feel of the corridor and the trucks, a single 5-foot wide bike lane is not a desirable solution because of the proximity to the traffic with the narrowed vehicular lanes adjacent to it.
I would like to make my last comment at this point. In my ideal world, I would like definitely to have Class 1 bike lanes traveling north and traveling south, but I do understand that it's not realistic, definitely. And at this point, based on the changes that we have to go with a different route. But alternative 1, in my opinion, at this point, is not an alternative because taking into consideration that original plan was to implement bike lanes and also Class 1 bike lanes, I do not really understand why are we presenting the alternative 1 as an option, because to me it more sounds like we're trying to say that we're not able to complete the project, to implement the project. So to me, alternative 1 is just a way to say that the project is not possible to do. That's my last comment at this point, and I would like to hear my colleagues.
Hi, this is Shauna. We haven't come to deliberation yet, so I think maybe your comment, it was framed kind of as the question that you phrased previously about, why would alternative 1 be a preference? If there's anything else to add to that in the formation of a question, we'll still hear from members of the public, and it sounds like you have a question. I also have a few questions as well.
Yeah, just a quick follow-up based upon something that was mentioned in terms of narrowed lanes. Can we hear about what the potential impacts to safety are between the alternatives?
Sure, Commissioner. Each of the alternatives, there are safety benefits as a whole with each of the alternatives because of the new raised median islands, because of the curb extensions that improve safety for the pedestrians, the higher visibility crosswalks. For the cyclists, the lane widths play a factor in terms of separation between the cyclist and the adjacent vehicles. 5-foot bike lane adjacent to 11-foot lane. Reducing the lane widths does inherently reduce vehicle speed as well. Going from a standard 12-foot lane to 11 down to a 10. It does play into speed and comfort for the drivers themselves. But again, also then narrows up the available space and clearances to the vehicles and cyclists in a bike lane that would be adjacent.
How does that impact, though, police and fire utilizing those lanes to answer emergencies?
Alternatives 1 and 2 would have a lesser impact on first responders because both lanes are still available to them to go around vehicles in the case of an emergency. Alternative 3 really reduces the lane width available for the first responders because you now only have a single lane. It could be adjacent to a raised median, adjacent to parked cars, which traps them on one side of the roadway. There was a representative from the fire department that was at the outreach meeting, expressed his immediate concern about the narrowing of the roadway in alternative 3 for that reason.
Would there be any projected increase in time of response between alternatives 1 and alternatives 2 or 2A?
It could be evaluated. We would have to look at the travel times for those two alternatives. That element wasn't analyzed previously because the key was with the lane reduction that occurred in alternative 3 and what that impact would have been. I would expect that the travel time is negligible in terms of differences between alternatives 1 and 2.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I just have a few clarifying questions. I'm curious about the 2012 bike plan. I think it's been removed from the website, and that's probably because we're in the process of updating it, or I had a hard time kind of locating it, but what I do have is the bicycle transportation plan implementation map. So I'm just trying to understand the context of this. If we're thinking of bike lanes, either sharrows or other, categories of bike lanes where it's connecting. When I look at this, the implementation map, which is, I think, the portions of the bike plan that have been put to implementation, it is fairly disjointed. So in terms of connections through the city or portions of it, kind of stops and starts. So I guess I'm wondering if we have a copy of it, if we could pull it up at some point during the discussion. It doesn't have to be this moment. So that's kind of just like the context. Another couple of questions. I'm thinking about that 5-foot buffer that's on the westernmost edge. And it sounds like it's been in all of the alternatives kind of dedicated to landscaping, including trees. There was also a question about which part of it was Glendale and which part of it was perhaps Caltrans. Are they the ones that own the right-of-way for the rail?
No, this would be the UP.
You're right, I'm making up
The railroad.
ownership, okay. I guess I'm trying to reconcile, so I understand we have the high-speed rail coming in, that's taking up additional space, excellent. Was some of our previous plan, when we thought we would have a bike path here, going to be on the UP property? I see. So it's kind of like the city of Glendale got reduced its capacity because now we're only within our property.
That is correct.
Okay. So then a couple other questions. So if we're on a timeline for a $5 million grant, can I get is there context of like what the 5 million means for the rest of the project? I imagine the rest of it is also quite costly. The 5 millions would be helpful. That's a good goal. What's the overall cost of the project? Sorry to put you on the spot.
Chairperson Bonstein, the overall cost of the project as it stands right now is approximately $11 million. So roughly a little bit, almost half of the project cost.
I understand. And then the visuals that we had, none of them show sharrows, but in the staff report, there was indication of sharrows. So are we to assume, for example, in 2A, which has, I'm just pulled that up. So we have a bike lane headed south, and then it would be a travel lane headed north with sharrows. Okay.
That is correct.
And then, do we have examples of existing single direction bike lanes in the city?
There is one example on Glen Oaks Boulevard between Central and Pacific.
Is it something, it's maybe considered less desirable, but sometimes it happens when there's not another alternative, or does it tend to be set up with an existing parallel bike lane in another street?
At that time, when that bike lane or when that street was improved, it was a maintenance project, and due to the limited right-of-way on the eastbound direction on Glen Oaks, we had to install a Class 3. And we did have some right-of-way in the westbound direction, so we did install a Class 2. But it's important to note that that Class 2 bike lane does straddle the concrete gutter. So effectively, bicyclists have only a 3-foot paved asphalt portion to ride on, and we've been receiving quite a bit of complaints from the bicycle community in them trying to traverse that area on that bike lane.
Thank you. I think we're satisfied with our initial questions. Let me go back to the agenda. Do I ask anything? Let's see. Do we have any speakers on this item? Thank you. Do we have speakers both in person and on the line, I imagine? Do you have a total?
We have 3 callers right now and 7.
Okay. I understand that there may be some presentations as part of the speakers. In which case, let's limit the presentations, I think, to 5 minutes. That's a lot. I'm just trying to navigate through the presentations that maybe normally we would do a couple minutes. Let's do 4 minutes. And let me ask the speakers that if you are repeating something that already was said, please just say as much, and be judicious with the time. I want to give credence if there was folks that prepared a presentation. Okay, with that, I think I call people. All right, I will call the first person. Matthew Taylor, please.
Hello. I just wanted to speak about the project. Ideally, in a perfect world, we'd end up with, alternative 3 with protected bike lanes up and down the corridor. We are, in the middle of a, ongoing climate crisis, and we would want to encourage as much alternative transportation as possible going forward. But, I understand with the construction deadline and, with the grant, that might not be possible now. I would highly encourage, the commission to support alternative 2A with the bike lane south, so at the very least, cyclists that are going south on the corridor have some sort of designated lane to use, so they're not, competing for space with traffic going south. And maybe in the future we could revisit a lane going north, but we'll take what we can get for now. If we just go with alternative 1, the people that have been using the corridor to bike basically just get the same thing. I mean, sharrows are basically as good as not having sharrows, because drivers basically ignore them, and bicyclists just kind of have to squeeze in the space that they get anyway. So I would encourage, if we can't do alternative 3, which it sounds like we can't, I would encourage 2A for, and hopefully we can address it in the future. I would also like to question, I noticed during the presentation about the grant that there was a strong emphasis on mitigating heat island effects, and making it a more pleasant experience for pedestrians walking around the corridor. That seems to be across all the alternatives. Improving the pedestrian experience seems to be a priority. I would question the benefit that median trees have for pedestrians in terms of heat. I am, in all favor of trees and shade trees, along the sidewalk to make things better for pedestrians. It really pushes the logic for me that median-based trees would have an effect on the temperature when they're, 2 travel lanes away from any pedestrians. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please. Alec? A single name.
For a presentation. Great. My name is Alec Bartrosov. Thank you all and for your service. Just wanted to come today to speak in favor of Alternative 2A and to especially oppose Alternative 1. And I'll go into the reasons why. Next slide, please. So Alternative 1, despite what was said verbally today, the project website does mention the implementing policies of various plans in the city, including the Bicycle Master Plan of 2012. Despite what was said, the bicycle plan is not a recommendation. It is a policy decision that City Council agreed on. And as per the map, that is a pullout from the Bicycle Master Plan. You'll notice that San Fernando Road is identified as a bicycle path. And also just noting that it does intersect with future bicycle lanes, including Grandview, existing bike lanes on Highland, and Riverdale as well. So I want to make sure that as we make these recommendations and these design approaches, that we adhere to adopted policy from City Council. Next slide. The reasons I oppose Alternative 1 is that it is simply not safer than Alternative 2A. I am very much interested in hearing from the engineers who think that having no bike lane on a street is safer than having a bike lane on a street. We have heard of an example of where we do have a unidirectional bike lane that is measurably safer than not having a bike lane. The other thing to point out through this configuration is the existing travel lane that you see in the southbound direction is only 11 feet wide. The existing condition is 13 feet wide. And so you're essentially narrowing that travel lane and pinching a bicyclist in the way of a semi-truck, a truck, whatever it is. Whereas in the existing condition, you have a little bit of a shoulder to be able to get out of the way of a vehicle. This really locks you into that southbound lane with essentially nowhere to go. And I argue that that is not safer than Alternative 2A. And also for the effects that come with the median improvements, yes, it does make roadways safer. That is usually in the case where you see a predominance of head-on collisions. That is not the common collision type along this corridor, where especially on the westbound side of the west side of the street, there's no activity. There aren't cars making left turns. So I argue that, yes, the median does provide some safety benefit, but not to people who are biking along the corridor. Next slide, please. Sorry, go back one. So 2A, as I mentioned, does provide a southbound travel bicycle lane. I do argue that you can make some minor modifications to this design to make it a little bit more safe. The diagram that you see here can be the condition at an intersection or on approach to an intersection, but you can make it even more safer in between intersections where you have these long, uninterrupted corridors, especially along San Fernando. So if you can go to the next slide. Go back one. This is, I tried my best with the design, but if you can pinch the median by a couple of feet in between the intersections, you can add a buffer to that existing southbound bike lane, so much so that you can potentially put in a protected bike lane in the southbound direction. Was that 4 minutes? Oh, I'm sorry. Can I just have a minute to wrap up?
About 30 seconds to
Yes.
conclude your thoughts. Thank you.
Next slide. And then I do want to mention that in a future improvement, we can take that right-of-way 5 feet above the curb to put in a protected bike lane in both directions. Next slide. I also argue for green paint for the bike lane to make it safer. Next slide. We talked about the unidirectional bike lane that's existing on Glen Oaks. Next slide. And then just to reiterate, we can modify 2A to make it safer, and that'll set us up for future upgrades for a protected cycle track at a later time after this project has been implemented. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, Yuriko Odo.
Hi. So I've lived in Glendale for about 5 years now. I live near the intersection of Chevy Chase and Central, which is they're both one of the biggest streets in Glendale. And I actually moved to Glendale without having a car. I thought I could make the bike life work. And my office was about 2 miles from me. And the only thing that made my bike remotely a little bit safer was that for the last mile, there was a bike lane. It wasn't protected, but it was still safer than the first mile, where I was taking up a lane in a car and cars would sometimes honk at me, get mad at me, swerve around me, and I felt in danger so many times. One time I was forced to get onto the sidewalk and there was a bike police waiting for me on a rainy day because I couldn't merge onto the one lane that was available. And actually my office had moved locations to somewhere that would require me to commute on San Fernando. And when that happened, I decided that it wasn't worth biking anymore. I bought a car at the Gelson's parking lot off of Craigslist because biking wasn't an option. It wasn't a safe option. And I actually learned how to drive because of that. And when I heard about this project, I was really optimistic because, I've been working from home since the pandemic, but if I could go back to that same office, maybe I could bike from now on. But when I heard about the results that maybe there wasn't going to be a bike lane, I was pretty disappointed because, even if it's not protected, any kind of bike lane is still a major improvement for accessibility. And so, yeah, I hope you'll reconsider. Thank you.
Next speaker, Kristen Blad. B-L-A-D-H, I think.
Blad, thank you. Hi, my name's Kirsten Blad. I live in Glendale without a car. Okay. Next slide. So the staff report failed to include any analysis of the existing bike network in Glendale and how it relates to San Fernando. San Fernando intersects with 5 bike lanes, which is by far the most of any roadway in all of Glendale. Several of those intersecting bike lanes connect to larger networks in Burbank and Los Angeles, including the very popular LA River Trail. Slide. This high degree of connectivity pretty much guarantees that San Fernando will be and is currently used by cyclists. And we can see this with crash data. Next slide. So from 2012 to 2022, 28 cyclists have been hit with injuries on San Fernando. And 2 of those crashes were the highest severity level other than death. Next slide, please. A third of those crashes occurred within the beautification project study area. Next slide. I also noticed, there's a lot of talk about, there's taking away the curb parking. So I looked at how much curb parking is actually available south of the 134 because he's correct that there is a lot of curb parking north of the 134. But if you look south, the majority of the curb area is already no parking. Next slide. So all of these areas in the bluish color are surface parking. So some of these blocks are literally just, the entire block is a surface parking lot. And the curb is red for at least half of it. Next slide. So here we see 3 surface parking lots that directly touch San Fernando, and most of the curb is red. Next slide. Again, about half of the curb is red, and there are 3 surface parking lots touching the street. Next slide. This is basically just a parking lot. There's hundreds of spaces in the Home Depot, and there's also there's 2 curb parking spots. Next slide. So this is the final stretch. There's not a single curb parking spot. So I can see that the area north of 134 does need that curb parking. There's a lot of residences, there's retail businesses that I go to. But south of the 134, I think could easily eliminate the sparse curb parking in favor of a bike lane. So I'm in support of 2A for the portion north of the 134 and alternative 2 south of the 134. Thank you.
Thank you. Lyndon Alexander de la Torre.
Hello. I am here in support of alternative 2A and if possible, alternative 3A. I'm actually a bike commuter and I usually bike all the way to Chinatown Station and then take the train all the way to my work. I said I sometimes use San Fernando Road, but honestly, I don't feel safe biking in that road. And yeah. That's it.
Thank you. Mike Borisov.
Good evening, commissioners. Also, someone left their phone here, so I'm going to put it on the table. Yeah. So hi, my name is Mike Borisov. I'm a student at Glendale Community College, and I work here for the district as a substitute teacher. So I don't use bikes. Unfortunately, I use the buses, but if there was a bike lane, I probably would bike to work. I wouldn't have to wait around for a bus in the heat without a tree nearby, but that's a different issue. I just have general comments and questions that I saw during the presentation, which kind of caught my eye. One of it was the mention of VMT via the BRT Nahota Pasadena. Yes, thank you for mentioning the project, but I find it very weird that it's mentioned. In my eyes, that's kind of like implying that we don't need further VMT reduction and therefore we don't need a bike lane. So I don't know why that comment was made. It has no nuance in this project. Another one is why are all cars usually only used for all road space? It's a very car-centric mentality that 100% of the road space has to be for cars, it has to be for parking. Why don't we just allow at least 20% to be for alternate modes of transit? There are other people in this city who don't own vehicles. I don't own a vehicle. I try to get by without vehicles because it's expensive and it's not good for the environment. And why is it that 100% of the road space is reserved for 100% of vehicle use? I don't think that's fair. Another one is a few facts. Vehicles going over 25 miles per hour are notoriously more dangerous than any biker or lane reduction. I think that mentioning that it's unsafe for children to have that breach lane is unjustifiable because cars traveling 45 miles or 35 miles down the road, however fast it is right now in San Fernando, is ultimately more dangerous than having a bike lane there. Another fact is that the entire point of this grant program was to create more sustainable cities. Increasing multimodal mobility is one of those goals from the state. We achieve none of that without that bike lane. So if you listen to the state legislature and the governor's office, the entire point of this Clean Air Grant program, or the funding for it, was to reduce vehicle miles driven by gas guzzling cars. If we go with alternative 1, you don't get any of that benefit. The point of the grant was to reduce car usage. You have to invest in bike lanes at least for that money. Another one was really weird reasoning for not wanting bikes in that lane. It was about because there might be trucks there, so it might not be safe for bikes. But how does that make sense? The reasoning behind not supporting alternative 2A has no logic to it. In order to create a safe bike route, we're going to create no bike route. That literally bars bikers from safely traveling up the street versus alternative 2A, where you have some separation from street traffic. So yes, it's bad right now if you're a biker, almost impossible. Yes, there's danger due to vehicles and truckers, but the goal would be to make it safer. And by not building an alternative 2A, for instance, because it could be dangerous, that doesn't make sense. It would be more dangerous to have nothing, which is what we have now. Other than that, I don't want to repeat what other people were saying, but there is more parking north of the project area, above the freeway. South of it, it's mostly commercial businesses who have their own parking lots, and there's more curb parking going east towards the city into the other lanes. So just want to say, please support alternative 2A, and please don't support alternative 1. Thank you.
Thank you. Our final in-person speaker, Jenny Hernandez. Thanks. Skinner.
Quinones Skinner. Thank you so much. It's a long last name. So I'm coming at this from a little different place. I'm not a bicyclist, but I do live in the area that's impacted. I'm on Ivy, which is one street south of Broadway. And I've been at other meetings to talk about needs for better safety, not these, but City Council for Pacific, for pedestrians, especially between that space between Broadway and Colorado. I'm a little disappointed because I did receive a door hanger and I completed the survey, and it was never my understanding that we wouldn't have a bike lane of some capacity. So my understanding as a resident in the area, when I completed a survey for a beautification project on this street, was that something was going to be done in terms of improving bike safety on San Fernando. So I'm a little surprised that we're looking at option 1 as the option. Right now, parking on San Fernando, I can tell you, because I head out on that street every day, I don't see it getting better or worse. There's a lot of cars that use it. One of the big issues that I've found actually with parking is not residents. We don't park out there because we don't want our car to get hit at night. It is large junk trucks that block our view and our ability to actually see when we make a turn onto San Fernando. That's my big issue. If you go actually down San Fernando towards Home Depot, you will see all of the junk trucks that are there. They park overnight, or they are cars that are part of the body shops that are on this street that are being repaired and kind of parked out there, or someone's had a collision and their car's there, or they've been at the bar and it's staying over the night over. These are not residential parking spots. So I do think there is some concern that I have about highlighting this as something that residents want. I understand there's limits by the city in terms of how much community outreach you can do, but speaking as a resident for more than 20 years, past president of the Glendale Latino Association, and a resident of this particular neighborhood for a couple years, and an employee of Glendale Community College, for me, these issues are really important. I try to take the bus. I try to walk as much as possible. I'm not perfect, you know. In my head, I'm saving a polar bear if I try to, but like at most, I'm getting some steps in. But the reality is that it's not safe to bike. I wish it was. I wish I could encourage someone to bike there, but it currently isn't. And I am disappointed that this is the option that's being brought to us after we had the door hangers, took time to fill out the survey with an understanding that I don't want a beautification project in this area that's just about making trees and making it nicer when I drive through. That's not what I want. And as a pedestrian that uses that corridor, I don't really feel like that's gonna make much of a difference. I use it now because I want to. And a lot of people in our neighborhood, it's a necessity. Getting around in that area is a necessity where whether you're taking the bus, you're riding the bike. We have a lot of folks that work at Home Depot that take bikes. We don't talk about our labor population in Glendale very much. They are actually big bike users. They're not here. Are we doing Spanish language outreach at Home Depot to talk to them about safety for bike lanes? I don't know if we did that. That is an issue that I do see that doesn't always happen in the city. I'm always nervous, even though I've done these a couple times, so I'm sorry.
You're doing great.
Just always happens when you get the mic in front of your face. So yeah, I think, you know, that's definitely a big issue. So I would definitely like to see yes on 2A above the 134, the 2 south. I mean, in an ideal world, I'd love protected bike lanes. I'm not a transportation expert. We leave those to your capable hands on this commission and the folks that work for the city to do right by us that are residents. But I would like to see better for that area and my neighborhood and my community, because I think we often get forgotten in this city, and we live here, we work here, we are a part of the city. And that said too, I have a very dear aunt and uncle that are coming to visit. They're bike riders. They're trying to figure out whether to stay between a hotel in Pasadena and Glendale. And they asked me, do you think it's safe to bike in Glendale? And I said, I don't know. I'm gonna email the Walk in Glendale group because I don't know if I would. But this project that you guys, this proposed project, I would say would not feel safe for them to bike there. So, thank you.
Thank you. Shifting to speakers that may have called in.
Yes, we have 4 callers. Mr. Nguyen, you're on the air. You have 4 minutes.
Hi, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Hello, Council. My name is Dennis Nguyen, and I'm a resident of Glendale. I live 1 mile away from San Fernando Road and utilize that corridor often. As a driver and not a cyclist because of the lack of protection in its current state. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I will be quick and succinct in my message, and I want to echo some of the considerations that previous speakers have said. I will not mince my words here. Alternative 1 is an admittance of failure of management of time and failure of utilization of grant money. Implementation of Alternative 1 is very evidently the settle option, where we are looking to use it or lose it and is a representation of mismanagement. If I leave here with the council believing that alternative 1 is the best option, then it is obvious that we have settled. Alternative 3A is my true choice, and while that proves to be impossible due to a mismanagement of time due to our deadline, I implore a redesign of Alternative 2A that implements a road diet and promotes walkability for pedestrian safety. We're a society of people, not a society of cars. The safety of our citizens should be the highest priority and not the usage of funds because we quote unquote have to. Traveling on this road currently is unsafe for pedestrians and for cyclists. We have a chance to improve this with the decision made for this project. Also, I agree with the previous speaker. The reality is the cars parked on San Fernando are junk trucks, crashed cars, and abandoned vehicles. Something such as implementing an enforced time limit or permit system will result in a massive reduction in cars parked there. Thank you for your time.
Dennis Martinez, you're on the air. You have 4 minutes.
Oh, hi. Is this me, Severin Martinez? Hello?
Yes, we hear you. Go ahead.
Okay. Hi, my name is Severin Martinez. I think there's a misunderstanding of how to measure BMT impacts according to the states. The Technical Advisory on Evaluating Transportation Impacts in CEQA, published by the Governor's Office of Planning and Research, states that active transportation projects generally reduce BMT and therefore are presumed to cause a less than significant impact on transportation. This presumption may apply to all passenger rail projects, bus and bus rapid transit, bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure projects. So the conclusions of the report that was presented seem totally inconsistent with what the state states quite explicitly. So I think that the report may have to be revisited to be consistent with how the state measures BMT impacts. Similarly, the emphasis on level of service appears to be inconsistent since the state shifted from level of service to vehicle miles traveled as the primary transportation impact for transportation projects. A representative stated during the presentation that the bike lane under option 2A isn't desirable due to traffic, trucks, and speeds. Yet somehow we have arrived at the conclusion that offering nothing is preferable. I can tell you that as someone who has biked on San Fernando Road, sometimes by accident, that I would gladly take a bike lane, and especially in the southbound direction because cars go really fast southbound. Without a bike facility on San Fernando, bike riders either need to go several miles out of their way to access the LA River, which isn't accessible at the moment due to the rain we've been having, or take a series of streets that don't quite parallel San Fernando, since San Fernando is the only street that cuts at an angle like this. I wouldn't want to rush this process and approve a bad design that is inconsistent with city policies and perhaps state policies as well, simply because there is money on the table. Option 2A seems like a pragmatic approach that leaves opportunities for future improvement, but on reflection as a whole, I would much prefer to see a more holistic and truly multimodal design for the project. Thank you.
Thank you.
Cara Sergio, you're on the air. You have 4 minutes.
Great, thank you. Thank you, commissioners, for your service. Cara Sergio, 22-year resident of Glendale, avid pedestrian, cyclist, public health nurse, you name it. I'm calling in to absolutely oppose Alternative 1. It's a cop-out. I am in support of Alternative 2 and 2A, as others have suggested. Alternative 2 north of the 134 and Alternative 2A south of the 134. I feel that Alternative 1 is absolutely just irresponsible. That's all I'll say. Thank you.
Thank you.
Cole, you're on the air. You have 4 minutes.
Yes. Hi there. Good evening, commissioners and staff. Thank you so much for your work on this project. I'm really excited for what could come of this. I think that there's an opportunity to revitalize this corridor and improve the safety and access for all users. I live in South Glendale and find myself over on San Fernando from time to time biking, and can attest that it is a very a very busy and dangerous feeling corridor. I believe that with the southbound bike lane that's presented in option 2A, that could really improve the experience for all users as well as the safety. I think the arguments for connecting our bicycle infrastructure in the city is also really compelling, and agree with previous speakers that that should be prioritized going forward. And I also agree with one of the previous speakers as well that the parking conditions south of the 134 on the northbound travel lane do appear to be really minimal and would potentially be a good option for including a northbound bike lane on that route. So I think there are some options for modifying 2A, and would really encourage, at the very least, the recommendations in that alternative. Let's improve the safety for all users. Thanks again. All right.
Thank you.
There are no more callers.
Thank you very much. Are there questions, or does anyone want to start with some deliberation?
Sure, I will. Thanks. Great to hear from the public and the speakers, both on the phone and here. I'm impressed by the amount of thought that went into a lot of these comments and preparation. So before I read the staff report on this, I was sort of feeling like, oh, looks like it could be a tough situation, and tough compromises to make here. We're being told that there is time pressure, et cetera, and that we have varying views in the community about how to best approach this. I think that it'd be good to look for some kind of compromise here. I'll say right off that I don't feel like it's okay to strike out important parts of council-approved city plans. Glendale has a policy of promoting and supporting active transportation, both in the bike plan and in the pedestrian plan. And I feel like we really need to try to work hard here tonight to try to honor those approved plans. These are our representatives, and they have agreed on them. So I guess for me too, I was thinking, well, if you were to look at maintaining all these travel lanes, it seemed like the question is, well, what's the utility of a one-way lane? So this southbound lane on the west side of San Fernando, I guess for me an aha moment was kind of like, oh yeah, I've used the one on Glen Oaks between Brandon and Pacific, and it's works perfectly well. The fact that there isn't one going the other way does not stop me from using it. I have actually ridden my bike both directions on San Fernando, and I've driven it many, many more times, of course, too.
You may continue.
Basically, I don't think there's a question about the utility, especially considering that the network thing. So not only some of the other speakers have mentioned the intersecting bike lanes that exist now, but there's also in the West Glendale Sustainable Land Use Plan, there's actually a proposal for excellent protected bike lanes on Grandview. So this project would basically connect and intersect with, say, a southbound running lane on San Fernando. So, and then also it continues down this project that we're talking about tonight continues down very close to, what's the street at the bottom? I'm forgetting. There's a street at the it's just one block south of where this project goes. Riverdale, thank you. I guess I'm looking at 2A. There's been a lot of support here tonight for that. I think that there's a lot of reasons to prefer this one as opposed to alternative one, besides this idea of like staying true to the city plans. And the question is like, can it be done in the time? It's important to try to get this money. I think that makes sense. So it basically doesn't take lanes, and it gives a one-way, for now, bike lane. And I think if we can consider that and consider the possibility of upgrading it in the future, that would be for the best. Like this idea of buffers between the turn pockets, the sections between turn pockets, narrowing the median slightly so that you can buffer the lane would be great. And then in the deep future, the idea that potentially the city could have a bike path, a two-way bike path, by using this city real estate that right now is to the west of the curb. One idea that would need to go with that would be not planting big trees there, but shrubs for now, to leave the future other uses open. So I think my bottom line is basically that Alternative 1 really locks us in forever to something that doesn't seem to be true to city plans, and 2A allows for an upgrade. So those are my main thoughts on it. I think 2A allows for flexibility, and we should favor it.
Thanks. I just have a question. I'll maybe pose my question, then I'll hand it over if other people have comments or questions. We heard from some of the comments today that a distinction between south and north of the 134 in terms of cars parked. Was there, were the surveys treated the same? Was there noted, I don't remember seeing that in the staff report. Was there any consideration of different alternatives, south or north?
Chairperson, there was not a consideration of providing different alternatives north and south of the 134, as was mentioned. For clarification, in terms of the overall parking in the 141 spaces, it was noted that there is 78 parking stalls north of the 134. There is 45 parking stalls between the 134 and Broadway, and then 18 south of Broadway. So it's about 40% of the parking stalls on the corridor are south of the 134.
Thank you.
I would like to know if there is any other option as far as implementing, because I've just heard 91% of our constituents and our residents were in favor of parking, in favor of option 1, and are concerned about our first responder. I don't want to disregard that, and I don't want to disregard the parkings that it works for our businesses along San Fernando Road. They do require those parking. And I understand some of it are they saying that it's not necessary, but I know parking spots are extremely needed for the businesses to be able to sustain existence. So I was just wondering if there is any other option that we can, do we have enough time to maybe implement a bike lane somehow in alternative 1, and to be able to, elevate everybody, to be able to help everybody, not only just, because 91% is tremendously large. I mean, people wanted alternative 1, the residents, the businesses, and everybody else. So is there enough time to be able to implement something that could create some sort of a safety for our bike riders, bicycle riders somehow? Or all the things have been exhausted?
Can I interject as you're answering too? So my understanding too is alternative 1 is the Sharrows. What's almost misleading, so there's alternative 2, which have this bike lane. Alternative 2A, I thought, was notable in that it is a bike lane to what you're mentioning, and it does not remove parking. Is that correct? So I don't know whether it's labeled 2A versus whatever. It
Yeah,
speaks
my
to
concern is that if, apparently the Sharrows aren't doing much for the bicyclists. So, I mean, if you're trying to implement some sort of my only concern is that for our first responder, and I don't want to impose anything on our businesses, because they will lose, they can't really operate, and we should not disregard them. We should be able to find a solution that, helps everyone. So on alternative one, we do have sharrows, but is there any way we can update those somehow that, you know, we can all benefit? I don't know, maybe the middle part, we can narrow it as our fellow commissioner mentioned, maybe make them a little bit smaller that we can have a possible bike path or, you know, a safer sharrows or something like that. Or do we have enough time to implement something like that?
So, Commissioner Ordubigian, the alternatives that our consultant looked at encompass all of the different available options. I mean, from fully protected bike lanes to the alternative one, which is sharrows. I don't think there's any additional alternatives that we can look at this point in time, if that answers your question. But again, all of those have been outlined as part of the staff.
Understood, thank you.
You know, for me, I keep coming back to the access for first responders, and I'm trying to understand. My understanding is that there wasn't any type of impact done, considering the manner in which 2A came into being, the difference between 10-foot lanes and 11-foot lanes, especially considering that San Fernando is, you know, designated as an emergency use, you know, access. Is there, you know, I mean, we have a representative from the fire department. Ideally, I'd love to see what the impact on the response times would be. But is there, you know, you mentioned that narrowing the lanes would actually slow the cars down, which definitely improves safety for bike riders. But what I'm trying to understand is, if you slow the traffic down, are you creating more traffic, and does that traffic potentially impact the response time for first responders? Is there, I mean, can we get the, you know, I see we have a representative from the fire department. Is there any general input that you might be able to share with us, or experience that you might be able to share with us about how narrowing of lanes might impact, you know, fire acts, you know, responding to calls in a timely manner?
Commissioner, my name is Brian Julian. I'm a battalion chief with Glendale Fire. Served the city for 28 years. So in regards to your specific question, the narrowing of lanes does slow everyone down, including fire apparatus. A typical fire truck or fire engine from mirror to mirror is between 9 foot 3 inches, 9 foot 6. So you have a 10-foot lane. You have to be very conscious of what obstacles the mirrors may come in contact with. That's the widest portion of the apparatus. Typically that's high up, so with cars it's not so much of an issue. Our main concern is having an avenue where we don't get locked in, and that occurs when you have a single lane and traffic intersections, especially with traffic lights. We become locked in for the duration of whatever that signal is. When you have a raised median that we can't cross into opposing traffic. So our greatest concern with this project is maintaining 2 lanes in both directions. We can negotiate the narrowing of the lanes, but we do need to have 2 lanes in order to provide timely responses.
Excellent. I appreciate it. I appreciate the context.
Yeah, absolutely. Any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I ask one more question?
Yes, there is another question.
No, not
of
a
you.
question for staff. Thank you.
But thank you for being on call and ready to come
just
back.
with regards to some of these questions, I wanted to ask staff. So to be clear, 2A, we're not losing any travel lanes. We're not losing any parking.
That is correct.
And the second question was, somebody mentioned that, you know, I saw the numbers, and I really appreciate, I appreciate passionate communities who advocate for, you know, the causes that they believe in. But there was a very interesting dichotomy between the businesses and the residents, and then the online survey in terms of the supported option. And somebody had mentioned that 2A was not introduced in that survey process. Can you clarify what exactly did 93% of the businesses and 70+% of the residents, what were they looking at specifically?
Specifically, alternatives 1, 2, and 3.
So alternative 2A was not presented as an option.
Correct.
In terms of the cities or the recommendation from staff, can you very briefly summarize what is the big opposition to 2A versus 1, just so that I have it kind of summarized and bullet pointed out?
So, Commissioner, before I answer that question, the perspective that we have in terms of implementing any bike lanes on any street is to make sure that it is safe, and we try to implement the fully, loaded in terms of the protected for the safety of the bicyclists. In this particular case, the alternative 2A, as has been mentioned several times, is the reason staff didn't recommend it was because of the limited, only on one side, not being able to protect it, and looking at it more holistically. In fact, what I'm going to ask Mr. Somerville to provide some information about alternative routes for bikes for San Fernando Road that he had talked to us about, and some recommendation in that. So that was really the only reason. Staff is not opposed to alternative 2A. Alternative 2A doesn't take away travel lane. It doesn't impede, as you heard, the emergency operations. It's just those concerns for, if we do that, what's going to happen in the future. And we wanted to, and since the new bicycle transportation plan hasn't been completed yet, we're looking at every street kind of on its own. So we're a little bit, flying in the dark. So that was really the only reason. Otherwise, the staff doesn't, have an opposition to 2A. However, I should also mention some of the comments that were made in terms of enhancing 2A. So implementing 2A by itself would be fine. If that's the direction of the or recommendation of this body and ultimately the City Council, I would like Mr. Somerville to address what some of the plans are that are being developed for some alternative bike trails, and also I'd like for him to also address what some of the issues are with this modifying the 2A to include additional buffers and all that. So maybe you could take one of them at a time.
And before that happens, you mentioned something about issues in the future. Could you elaborate? What would potential issues be in the future, so that I can better understand this, of implementing something like 2A from a holistic standpoint, as you said, when you look at the totality of planning it out?
Well, again, nobody can predict what's going to happen in the future, but where we are today, we did look at, for example, putting bike lanes on both sides and protected, and those have all limitations in terms of either the parking or taking away a travel lane that impact the emergency operations vehicles. So that's what I was talking about. So unless something shifts or changes in the future, those restrictions will still be with us in the future. Which is why, again, the staff didn't recommend 2A, and we were looking for, and we have been talking with our colleagues over at CDD in terms of their work on the update of the bicycle transportation plan to see if there is an alternative route for San Fernando Road for bicyclists. And that's the part that Mr. Somerville has some information on.
Excellent.
Sure. So Commissioner, let me start with the modified 2A option that's been brought up this evening. A couple of factors into that. The median, as was noted, or the configuration at intersections would be per alternative 2 with the 5-foot with no buffer adjacent, because you need all of that width. To narrow that mid-block also requires transitions in and out for the traffic to meet the requirements of that transition. There's also a lot of streets, intersecting streets along the corridor. And so we'd have to really look at what's the feasibility, because narrowing it to 6 feet obviously doesn't allow you enough space for left turn lanes. We've heard that in the outreach about making sure we maintain left turn lanes at the streets. So we'd be looking at transitions in and out essentially at every block unless a decision was made to carry a median through an intersecting street. So there's that factor that we would have to look at. Using the space between the curb and the railroad right-of-way. That area also is being used for bus stops. So elimination of that to include it inside of a bike lane would then eliminate the ability to put bus stops in. And we can't take the bus stop and put it entirely inside the railroad right-of-way, because LA Metro and high-speed rail coming through is using all of their right-of-way. So that would also be a challenge. But as the director said, alternative 2A as is fits within that footprint without issue. In terms of overall bike planning, alternative in the routes, we were looking at, with the bicycle transportation plan in the works, are there opportunities for parallel paths other than San Fernando Road to carry the north-south bikes? Glendale does have your Riverwalk Trail that's been built up to Verdugo Wash. LA Metro has funding to build a bridge over the Verdugo Wash to connect it to the south side. They also have funding to do a pedestrian and bicycle overpass at Doran Street with the closure of that at-grade crossing. So there is connectivity that's coming south of the 134, over the rail tracks, over Verdugo Wash, that also opens up future opportunities for even the east bank of the LA River. Now, within the city of Glendale at that point in time, but it is an option to be considered. Items like this is what I think is part of the bicycle transportation plan, in that holistic look at the big picture, what opportunities are out there and what should be considered.
Would any left turns be eliminated if 2A was implemented, or is it only that the median would be just coming in and out the entire length of the?
It would be the latter if we went with an enhanced 2A to provide a buffer for portions of the corridor.
Is there any impact in terms of preferability between those two options in terms of I don't know, from a aesthetic standpoint, or I'm trying to understand is it just the difficulty of planning that, or does it just not look good? I'm trying to understand what the opposition is to it.
It's the ability to actually implement, and how much space do you really have to implement that between blocks. Again, because the intersecting streets are not long distances in between them along that east side. Yeah, so it would be visually, yes, in and out. You would be able to provide limited space to where you could provide a buffer to that southbound Class 2 bike lane, but it wouldn't be for extremely long stretches. And if we did block left turn lanes, basically close off the side streets, we have traffic counts, we could look at the numbers, but you also have to look at, okay, how does a driver southbound who no longer can make a left turn, where does he have to go to make a U-turn, or what route does he have to come back to get to his original destination? It's something that would have to be evaluated.
But that would be evaluated quickly over the next couple of months because the design would have to be at 100% and construction starts at the beginning of the year, correct?
We wouldn't even have 2 months. We would have to literally move forward with the design. And one other thing also would be in narrowing the medians. You know, this is a beautification project, so we would have less median to work with in terms of, you know, planting. At this point, the plan is, despite some of the comments that were made, to plant, I believe, both the trees and the shrubs, correct?
Correct.
So we would have, that has to be taken into consideration.
Yeah. And a clarification on the median planting and the trees, that is pure straight benefit to the overall heat island by removing asphalt and putting in planting. The median island isn't a benefit to the pedestrians in the parkway, but it's for the overall heat island impact.
And there were, I'm sorry, I'm just going through the questions as there were some comments about the purpose of the grant. Is there any chance of not, of the grant being withdrawn or the city not meeting the requirements of the grant if a bike lane isn't included?
No, that's not true.
Okay. I just wanted clarification on whether or not that would impact the actual, you know, grant itself in any way.
The grant is primarily a corridor beautification grant.
Got it.
And another fact on the medians, if I may, we're using the medians to capture and infiltrate and treat stormwater in that area. So narrowing the medians effectively narrows your BMP that you're going to be installing in those medians to capture as much stormwater as you can. And as we all know, we try to capture as much stormwater as we can with all our projects.
Okay, those are all the questions that I have. Yeah.
Just had a quick question. So the alternative 2A would not basically benefit us that much. I mean, if the distance between the intersections are short, does it really would help the situation of protecting our, I mean, not quite understand exactly how would that go? I mean, is it?
Sure, Commissioner.
Yes.
Alternative 2A would provide the continuous Class 2 bike lane in the southbound direction. Okay. It would not impact left turn movements. The enhanced Alternative 2A that was brought forth tonight.
That's what I was trying to make, there's a clarification. There's 2A, and he was talking, the difference is a comparison between 2A and enhanced 2A.
Correct.
So the 2A would be all right.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
I sense your want.
I just wanted to clarify my comment earlier about the trees and where to plant them. That was for the space between the west side of the street, between the curb and the UP right away, not the median. I also had a question about, like, do we have time to potentially shave a foot or two in the design? That seems like it's important. Is that something that can fit into our schedule if we try hard?
Commissioner Lester, shaving a foot or two, how do you mean? Where?
This idea of the enhanced version of 2A, which would basically slightly narrow the center median of the street in order to allow for buffering of the sections of the bike lane that don't have a turn pocket next to them. So obviously there isn't space to have a buffer all the way through because it interferes with the space required for turn pockets, correct? So that's what I mean.
At the intersections, you mean?
So at the intersections, there isn't room for a buffer. But if you were to narrow slightly the hardscape medians, there could be room for a buffer in the sections between the intersections where the median is.
Commissioner Lester, that's something we could take a look at to see if that's, how, is it 1 foot or 2 foot if it's more, but I mean, we could take a look at. I'm going to ask Mr. Oganessian, have we looked at that for the intersections already?
Commissioner Lester, so narrowing that median down to 6 feet to give yourself a minimum 3-foot buffer on the west side, or for the southbound travel lane. As Mr. Somerville indicated, the transition tapers that you need to be able to transition for the southbound travel, as well as the median to the left turn lanes at all the intersections, effectively, because of the short distance between the blocks, will provide pretty much no space or very limited space for a protected buffer on that side. That's due to the short blocks on San Fernando Road that Mr. Somerville was trying to allude to. The minimum transition taper at 25 miles per hour posted speed limit is 100 feet in each direction. So that's 200 feet. A typical block is around 300 to 400 feet. So you're gonna have very little space left. The speed limit on San Fernando Road is 35 miles per hour. So that factors the transition taper and requires a much larger taper. In short, to be able to accommodate that in this condensed timeline is going to be difficult to achieve. It can be something that we look at, but it will most likely be very difficult to achieve.
Yeah, thanks for being open to looking at it. Appreciate that. I mean, I think of the block south of Dorn as actually being a very long block. There's nothing but a right-of-way on that side for a long way. I mean, there might be some shorter blocks in there somewhere, but it's not the same as the east side of the street where there's regular streets. All that's there is, there's only a few crossings to cross the UP tracks. So it seems like those are long blocks, right?
I'm talking about in between the signalized intersections as well. So whenever you come to a stop at an intersection, if you're stopped, you need to transition if you're going from a narrower lane to a wider lane.
Okay, yeah,
and
no, I
vice versa.
understand. I got it, yeah. Okay, thanks. All right, well, thanks. If you can at least look into it as a possibility, that'd be great. Thanks.
I will add just a couple mostly their comments, and then I'll turn it to Commissioner Avagian. If you have any questions or comments, want to make sure that you are heard. Well, I want us to just start, actually, we didn't really emphasize this, but kudos to Glendale for getting the grant. I looked it up, and we have a pretty good grant compared to a lot of cities, cities that are larger than us included. So really, just grateful that we have this opportunity. And looking at the kind of emphasis for the funding, it is on beautification, it is on pedestrian safety, but it kind of includes a lot of things, and luckily a lot of what we do in the right-of-way and a lot of planning and urban design can have multiple purposes. In hearing, the discussion, the deliberation, the comments, it feels very compelling to me in looking at 2A. It's a little unfortunate that we didn't get a chance to have survey results kind of looking at 2A, because 2A is so different from 2. And I do think there is a value in having something rather than nothing. And it's not the worst thing to have one direction and a future commitment goal to have a return direction, even if it's in a different street. I'm, again, kind of been looking at the map that looks like our implementation. I feel like our ability is so few and far between, like to really implement those options when we can. It's encouraging to know that 2A could be done in time. All the options can be done in 2A, perhaps with the question of the 2A, I'm going to say 2A alternative, but it's the enhanced. 2A enhanced is a maybe. Again, for 2A, the 2 lanes in both directions with a safety consideration, heard that. Also not removing parking, although that tends to be such a focal point of our discussions when we're looking at bike lanes. I think there is common agreement that the parking here and the kind of physical environment that we have is a little bit unique to this as a street. So again, really feeling it resounding. Delighted to hear that 2A is not, I'm putting words in your mouth, but was not offensive to staff or was not particularly problematic. But those are some of my thoughts. And with that, Commissioner Avagian, did you want a chance to speak, to ask questions?
Yes, I actually had a question. If I understood correctly, the alternative 2A and 3A were not provided to the during the outreach, were not provided as an option for them to look at, right?
That is correct. That is correct.
Yes, that is correct.
And may I please ask why?
Certainly. The alternatives 2A and 3A were a byproduct of the outreach that was conducted with alternatives 1, 2, and 3. In hearing the community, hearing the concerns, knowing that the loss of parking was a significant impact, understanding that cut through and the bypass traffic with the lane reduction was a big concern to the community. We looked at alternatives 2 and 3 as to how could we tweak those that would address the larger concerns that we are hearing from the community on the parking and the cut-through traffic to help alleviate that. And that's how alternative 2 came about with just the southbound direction, because it maintains all of the parking, maintains the 4 lanes. Same with 3A, where we maintain the parking and we maintain 2 northbound lanes. We couldn't fully mitigate the traffic impacts in the bypass traffic because we're still reducing the southbound direction to a single lane.
Okay. As far as questions, I do not have a question at this point. Should I make my comment, or this is not the right timing? It's hard in the distance to understand. Yeah, so, as mentioned earlier, and then even after hearing the community members to speak, I'm even more concerned that alternative 1 is not the true alternative. And in the case of alternative 1, we would basically be recommending no biking lanes. And sharrows are not really a bike path. It does not make biking any safer, and we're supposed to be encouraging biking. I have mentioned a couple of times during our previous meetings, I'm not an active biker, but I want to be one. And I just wish that our city could have the infrastructure, and I could just do that. And I believe that a lot of people feel the same way. And based on the community members, I'm even more concerned about it. The argument that narrower lanes are uncomfortable for the driver while we're making a biker to share the road with the car, that's not really a good argument. And so far, I have not heard any argument that is a good reason why we should not go with, why we should not recommend the alternative 2A. And I don't know. To me, we're supposed to encourage biking, and then we're supposed to make Glendale a safer place for bikers. And as I have said, in my ideal imagination, in my ideal world, we would go with class 1, both ways, traveling northbound and south, but just being realistic and with pragmatic compromise, 2A is the most realistic option, and it just aligns with the city's bike policy too. I'm all for beautification again, but not in the cost of eliminating bike lanes. I understand the holistic part of it. I do understand truly that that's not the ideal version to have only traveling one way, but at least having one way, just like comparing to not having any lanes, to me is much, much, much better. That's all at this point.
Thank you. With that, I think I'll ask if there is a motion to. Oh, yes, please, you have a question.
I'm sorry. Yeah,
Yes.
I know I've spoken a lot, but I just had one more question. As this may be not accurate to the way it was going to come out, but in the presentation, I noticed that at Colorado, there's a slip lane shown. Right now, I think it's a very wide radius turn there. I was just wondering, would it be possible to remove the slip lane so that there's a sharper corner there at Colorado?
You're correct that there is the northbound right turn is a
Yeah.
free turn movement, right turn movement. We have been looking into that and solutions, especially because you see a proliferation of incidents and accidents on record at that intersection. At the current time, because of the geometry of the intersection and the skew that we have from northbound to go east onto Colorado, it makes it tough for the turning movements and to be able to carry them through. So we have evaluated, we're looking, right now we have not converted it to just a right turn lane and make it kind of a typical right turn lane where they come to a stop, or if they have the green light, they make the movement, so it's not a free move. But narrowing that up, again, to slow vehicles down, tighten the corner up a little bit, provide the high visibility crosswalks. So we're looking at a couple of different solutions of how to handle that.
Great, thanks. Yeah, I know, for example, like they're working on a complete street at Victory that has a slip lane that's actually just over the border in LA, but we're connected with that project, but I think that slip lane is cited for removal, and it seems to be a thing of losing slip lanes. So whatever can be done to tighten the radius and extend that out.
Yeah,
I'd favor that.
And that solution would be the same across all the alternatives being considered.
Thank you.
Chair, if I could just make some comments. I asked some questions, but generally speaking, I tend to, after reading this report carefully, I mean, I tend to defer to, staff when they look at things holistically and plan these things out. And, but, having said that, the differences here between 1 and 2A are an 11-foot median versus a 9-foot median, 11-foot lanes versus 10-foot lanes, mostly, 3 of the 4. And I understand the concerns about having a bike lane in an industrial neighborhood, but frankly, the numbers that had been provided in terms of the surveys, gave an option that was eliminating a lane. And so I understand businesses' concern about eliminating parking, residents' concerns about eliminating lanes, but I have a very difficult time in a case when there isn't a clear difference that's being verbalized or explained to me between these two competing options, not to go with the consensus of including a bike lane, especially, and I hear that there's some impact to groundwater, but that seemed to be more collecting groundwater, but that seemed to be more with the enhanced, this talk about this enhanced option. I'm going to focus on what staff has provided in terms of 1 and 2A. It sounds like there's a consensus, generally speaking, for 2A. I prefer number 1 because I have a gut feeling that there will be an impact in terms of the response time for first responders, but I mean, hearing from the fire department saying that they don't think that it'll be that big of a deal as long as we maintain those lanes. I'm inclined to compromise and go with the consensus. Thank you.
Thank you. With that, is there a motion?
Yes, I'll make a motion. that we?
I have a question. So we're making a motion to do what? Can someone explain? To go with what specific recommendation?
I was going to see who the first person reading a motion, which option they wanted. If I'm reading from my script, is there a motion to recommend the implementation
Madam
of
Chair,
alternative? Yes.
sorry to interrupt.
Oh, yes.
Our fire chief wanted to make a clarifying remark.
Yeah, sorry if I may
Okay.
clarify. So when I mentioned that the narrowing of the lanes doesn't have an impact on us, all of these we're down to 11-foot lanes. We try to have 12-foot lanes. So when I said an apparatus is 9.3 to 9.6 wide and we can work with the narrowing, it's referring to an 11-foot lane. I should have clarified, a 10-foot lane. We don't have a lot of buffer if you have a truck on the side or something large. Small vehicle, not a problem, but if you're up against another large vehicle, 10 foot is a very narrow window. So just to the point to understand, it does slow us down. So I'm not sure if the way I said that, I explained it correctly to you, so.
Let me, if I may, so I just want to get that, my only concern is I don't want any kind of an imposition on our first responders. So if you go with option 2A, that will reduce the street side and that will have an impact on your operations, basically.
On the lane that is 10 feet wide, yes,
Yeah,
that's a narrow
that
lane
is-
for us.
that
It
is
will
a
slow
problem.
us down, yes.
Yeah, that is a problem. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate the clarification. I mean, in that case, it's, in that case, it's difficult for me from a public safety standpoint to, now I would say I strongly prefer option 1 because that's my biggest concern. My biggest concern is impacting the first responders' ability, their response time. I 100% would be okay if everybody checked off that there isn't a big difference between 1 and 2A, especially when it comes to the response time for first responders, and I was ready to support 2A. But considering that clarification, and I appreciate you stepping up and clarifying, considering that clarification, I think it would be irresponsible actually to go with 2A, considering that until there can be a safe way of both addressing concerns of the cyclists who'd like to use that throughway and prefer to have a designated lane or a protected rather than sharrows versus, response time. And I understand that the San Fernando corridor is designated as a route for emergency first responders in the city of Glendale. So in that case, I strongly prefer and support option 1. Thank you.
Madam Chair, if I may, again, we wanted to make sure that, again, the commission was presented with all the different alternatives. And in hearing your comments regarding the width, we can look at the median, and we can look at shaving off a foot off the median to put that back into the lane to make sure that it's 11 foot wide instead of 10 foot wide, because we agree that the life and emergency operations are need to happen regardless. So we can look at making that happen if that's would help in terms of option 2A.
So just to clarify, that would be the south traveling, because in alternative 2A, those 2 lanes on that side are 10 feet. So is one 11-foot lane?
Well, a couple of feet.
Okay. Is one 11-foot lane sufficient to not impact? And this is a question for the battalion chief. Is one 11-foot lane on either side sufficient to not impact response time for?
Well, the issue would be you can't consistently travel on a heavily a road with a lot of traffic consistently down one lane. Vehicle code requires vehicles to move to the right, which would mean we try to stay in the left lane, the number one lane. That does not always happen due to a variety of reasons, people not understanding the rules of the road or having obstacles that impede them from pulling to the right. So it would still, I can't say yes or no, because we do not, on a typical response, we don't just stay in one lane. We do have to change lanes. So.
Yeah, and in this case, both left lanes are 10 feet. It's the right lane traveling north that's 11 right now in 2A. So cutting 3 feet from the median, it was exactly the issues that we had talked about, making a 6-foot median versus a 9-foot median. It's already dropped down from an 11-foot median to add 1 foot to each of those 3 lanes in option 2A. It just sounds like, yes, in the perfect ideal world, just as Commissioner Avakian said, I would as well. I'd love to have bike lanes protected. And if we had that right of way that was taken away since the 2012 bike plan was initiated, for the high-speed rail, which is going to serve the environment, then we would be able to do that. We'd be able to have option 2A with 2 protected lanes, but that was taken away because of that high-speed rail. So it just sounds like option 1 is the option that takes into account public safety in terms of first responders' use of San Fernando, which is designated as an emergency route.
Can I add something to this discussion about lane width and a key point here I think we need to recognize is that we're talking about striping. The truck can cross the striped line if it needs to. I think as the fire personnel mentioned, the main impediment in a street design like this is not where the lines are. It's actually this hardscape median. Like that's what limits the maneuverability of a large vehicle in a situation like that. Also for staff, so I think the standard travel lane in Glendale on surface streets is 10 feet, right? My understanding is that a 12-foot lane is a 70-mile-an-hour lane. That's what they use on the 5 freeway. Isn't that correct?
Commissioner Lester, the standard travel lane in residential areas is pegged at 10 feet. Yes, correct.
Thank you.
Just so that I understand though, but I think the issue, I don't have an issue with I understand the lane striping, that it's not landmines all the way down. My concern is that it's an industrial, it's a primarily industrial route, and that and as the battalion chief brought up, there are lots of large trucks. Is there a breakdown? I mean, how that 20+ thousand cars per day, what the breakdown is of what kind of vehicles travel?
I would have to go back and look at the traffic counts that were done. I don't have the numbers available.
Yeah. My concern is just safety, and so I mean I think we've hashed it out. I think it's a matter of just now, having the commission vote on it.
My concern again is safety, and also I do not want any imposition on our first responders. So my recommendation would be also 1. I would love to have a bike lane in there. I don't understand if there's any other, I would hope that if there were any other alternatives that we could have implemented. But at this point, I think it'll be irresponsible. It's just trying to slow our first responders down because lives are in matter, It could be somebody that really needs them. So I would go with option 1 at this point.
And I'll make a motion, actually. Oh, sorry, Ms.
So we are basically, with all respects, I'm truly concerned about safety and everything, and first responders are very important. That's #1 priority. But in this situation, it's not like they are denied access, they can't access or anything. And we're talking about safety, and we're taking into consideration all the factors, but we're not talking about safety of bikers. So we're basically, again, asking them to share a road with car drivers, with cars, which is not safe for them. We're not taking into consideration the safety of the bikers, but we're taking
You've frozen. As she comes back, I would like to be able to make a couple comments. I agree with where I think she was going, which is we are talking about safety, and we're talking about, including safety of bicyclists. There's nothing that precludes fire trucks or safety responders from accessing the road. I imagine there's sirens blaring. There are people heading off to the sides, making room during emergencies. Are you back?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Oh, okay. I don't know where did you guys stop hearing me. So my only concern was, hello?
Yes, go ahead.
My concern was that we are taking into consideration all the aspects, but we're again denying and ignoring the fact that it's not safe for bikers, and we're asking them to share a road with cars, and it goes against their safety. And it's clear, it's not like it's slowing down very little, there is no way or anything for first responders. We're clearly basically not recommending a safe travel lane for bikers. Am I understanding my colleagues correctly? Mr. Ordubadian and Mr. Amirian?
And look, the question that you're asking for me, I want to consider everybody's safety, but I have to consider, from a number standpoint. And so we saw the data that there was 22 collisions, over the past 10 years. What's the impact of a 30-second or 1 minute or 2 minute, delay in response time for every emergency call during a high traffic situation in the morning and night? How many people would be negatively impacted by that? And especially considering Glendale already has spectacular response times. Our fire department responds to every emergency call, medical call, and to impact that in the case of a stroke, a heart attack, those minutes matter. I'm not belittling the fact that we need to consider safety for our cyclists. I think it's paramount that we consider the safety of all of our residents. But the reality here is I'm getting information from the fire department, from the first responders, that there will be an impact to the time in this industrial corridor if there are 10-foot lanes. And so that's what informs my decision, Ms. Alakan.
I would just say that there are choices that when we're making that we're considering all factors, and that I hate to think that safety is going to be, certain safety concerns are going to be at odds with good planning, good urban design, good features that support and enhance alternative transportation. I do think if we had someone here every time, we could make a case for a safer option that includes no trees, no medians, a series of sequences or removing of characteristics in our built environment that are valuable. So I think we just have to be cautious not to go down the road, pun intended, of really prioritizing that at the expense of what I believe our commission is here for. I will also say, in my job, in working with the planning department, we also have discussions with our fire, department and our police department, and sometimes planning and urban design can feel at odds with some of the departments that are looking at safety. I hope that it doesn't come down to choices like that. And let me just add one example. We can be looking at lanes and the width of lanes, 11 foot versus 10, but also we have fire trucks that are a certain width. I'm just kind of posing theoretically, there's no reason that fire trucks continue to expand and safety vehicles continue to get larger at sometimes the expense of our built environment. That's like a bigger philosophical thing, but I'm just trying, to kind of make a point that I concur with our commissioner about, I think we may have a difference of opinion of what safety we're looking at, but at all things equal, the street certainly seems in a 10-foot wide lane and a 10 and 11-foot wide lane, it's still very possible to respond in a quick manner and still address the safety issues that we've heard presented today by the numbers of traffic accidents.
Can I add too, one more note on this discussion we're having is, I think that, going a little wider, when you're looking at the role of government, I think right at the very top, we're looking at life safety needs to be at the top. That extends to more than how long it takes one kind of vehicle to go down a street. There's also a known association between the width of lanes and the speed of the traffic. And there's a known association between the speed of traffic and collisions that cause injuries. So we also need to think about, when we're talking about maintaining extra wide lanes for the fastest possible flow, this other effect that can happen in cities, which is you have cars going faster and crashes with more injuries. So it's a balance between competing goods, and I think that life safety needs to be the goal, not only one kind of travel. So you don't want to make it super fast to get down a road to get to an accident that was caused by a lane that's too wide or overly wide.
Yeah, and that's fair. Glendale is a city of 200,000 people, and so this idea of let's just we could remove every travel lane and just make it a bike and walk city. That's just not a realistic. It's not a realistic option. And so I appreciate the idea of making the fire trucks smaller and these ideas. I'm just dealing with the situation that we have in front of us, which is there's a $5 million grant that was primarily for beautification. I was willing to go down from an 11-foot median to a 9-foot median because there wasn't really any impact until there was a clarification that it would impact the response time for first responders. And so, look, I get it. It's a city of 200,000 people, and even that community, I don't know how many bike riders there are on a daily basis versus emergency calls. That would be numbers that we can look at. But this idea of saying that it's equal here, like this consideration of, well, we want to protect the bike riders, and even if there's a delay in the response time of our first responders, it's okay. Or, and Chairperson, with all due respect, I don't know what city it is that you work in, but I don't know what their response times are compared to the city of Glendale's response times and what the findings of, and I know from my time on the audit committee, I know that there is a correlation between response times and outcomes for the types of emergencies that we see here in Glendale. We also have to cater to an elderly population that suffer from strokes, from heart attacks, from emergencies that require response time. So I appreciate it. I was on the same page with you. I even told staff, hey, if there's no appreciable difference, I'm with 2A. But there is an appreciable difference here. And so sticking to this idea of like, well, I know you all are passionate about the bikes. I get it, and I want to support that. But there's an impact here, and that impact is going to impact more people potentially negatively than a having the status quo of, however many bike riders there are on a daily basis and however many collisions there have been over the past 10 years, I think the impact of potentially affecting our response time for our first responders, it's not really an apples to apples comparison.
If this is a concern, I guess I'm confused. Why wasn't it in the staff report? Like, I guess the question is too, if we're taking evidence at the meetings from other departments, what is that formal process?
Is this a hearing? Or are we just getting information and we have, a battalion chief who's visited, who's taking his time to come here and provide context. And so he's providing context. He's not, based upon his 28 years of experience, he's providing us with context. He's not testifying under oath. It's not a process that we have to take evidence in. And I think staff invited him for that express purpose.
Oh, I didn't understand that was true.
Madam Chair, we provided the information in our staff report based on consultation with the fire department on all the different alternatives, including if we take a lane of travel out, obviously that's going to impact emergency operations. And our recommended alternative was alternative number 1, which didn't impact their operation. So that's the reason. And we had the chief here to answer any further questions that the commission might have had on any additional impacts.
Thank you. I didn't understand that because he wasn't introduced in the beginning, so I wasn't sure how we normally take information, if it's not evidence, information from other departments, which I imagine is all something that under consideration. We could bring in everyone.
Sure.
But okay, thank you.
Just want to add something else too. City of Glendale is a very old town, and it hasn't been built in a way to accommodate every kind of a different implementation that we have right now. So I do understand the bike lanes are necessary, that we need to do. We have to look at all the alternatives to find out how else we can implement those things in here. But right now, as it sits, it cannot accommodate certain impacts. I mean, the one that we have right now, speaking about impacting our first responder, and I cannot be okay with it. And that's basically the only reason. Otherwise, we're all for bike lanes and safety for our bicyclists. But as Commissioner Amirian mentioned before, is that we need to find out, is it going to impact more of our residents? Or, what is the real impact on this? And unfortunately, I don't think that option 2A would be sufficient enough to be able to implement that. So I go with an option 1.
So just one short comment. If I'm not mistaken, one of the speakers have mentioned that there were severe injuries of 20-something people, right, bikers, during the past 10 years, I believe, because they were traveling without a bike lane. I mean, because we don't have any bike lanes. If the speaker can step up and confirm the number, I would truly appreciate, because I don't remember the precise number.
It's in the report, I believe, isn't it?
Yeah, Madam Chair, I'm going to ask Mr. Somerville to clarify that in terms of the statistics for our project. I believe the speaker might have been talking about the entire corridor, but this is, Mr. Somerville can clarify that.
Yes, Chair, Commissioners, within our project limits, there were 18 accidents on file over the last 10 years. 8 were involving pedestrians, 10 were involving bicyclists through our corridor. Of those 10, 2 were deemed as severe injury. 7 out of the 10 were broadside, which means left turn movements in front of a cyclist. 2 were sideswiped with right turn movements. So that, again, kind of puts the clarification on the incidents or accidents on record over the last 10 years within our project limits.
So 10 cyclists in 10 years is 10 cyclists too many. But what is the impact of delayed response times due to narrowed lanes on outcomes for heart attacks and strokes? How many heart attacks, strokes, other emergencies where time is of the essence have happened along that corridor over the past 10 years? I venture to guess it's in the thousands. And so what is the impact? We can only speculate because that's a lot of information to parse down. But we're getting a perspective or testimony from a battalion chief with 28 years of experience who is talking about the impact of narrowing lanes on response times and that it will affect response times. So given the information that we have on this project, given the time constraints that we're facing, given all of the research that's gone into it and the information that we have on hand, I would love, 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 love to simply say, yes, let's put in the bike lane. But I can't, not on this project. And that's where I stand, given the information that we have. And so, yeah, that's where I'm at.
Can I add? I mean, I think we have entered the realm of speculation here because there is really no indication of what kind of a delay it could be that we're talking about here. We're not talking about any kind of a barrier here. It's a line of paint. The road is not getting any narrower. It's a line of paint. The fire truck can drive 1 foot over that line of paint. The cyclist will yield, just like everyone legally must yield for emergency trucks. And also, I just want to be very clear that no one here is arguing that we have to have bike lanes, protected bike lanes on every street in the city. We're talking about one street. That's my comment.
And one last question. So as of right now, the recommendation 2A that's in front of us, it does not reduce any lanes, correct? Which was the major concern of the fire department. Right?
Commissioner, that is correct. It does not eliminate any lanes.
Okay, so just one last comment. We don't know what delay, if any, of this will cause. We're speculating, and yeah, and then if I can, I would like to make a motion if there is.
Yes, please. Thank you.
Okay, then I would just move to recommend 2A to the city council because with all the opinions that we have heard, with all the concern that we have heard, it's not removing any lanes, which was the major concern, and this is an option that I hope we can implement and have a safe bike lanes in the city.
Second.
I'll take roll call. Chairperson Bonstein,
Yes.
Commissioner Lester,
Yes.
Commissioner Avagyan,
Yes.
Commissioner Ordubegyan,
No.
Commissioner Amirian.
No.
Thank you.
Is there a next item?
Item 7, public hearing. Public hearing of appeal from staff's denial of resident application for installation of speed humps lumps on Western Avenue between Kenneth Road and Bel Air Drive. 1, motion affirming or reversing staff's denial of resident application for installation of speed humps lumps on Western Avenue between Kenneth Road and Bel Air Drive based on information presented at public hearing. 2, motion recommending installation of speed feedback radar signs and two-way traffic warning signage on Western Avenue between Kenneth Road and Bel Air Drive. Thank you.
Do we have a presentation or any speakers for this item?
Madam Chair, we do have a quick overview but I understand Ms. Siegel, who's appealed our decision, has been waiting for a long time, so if it's okay with you for her to go first, we would have no problems.
Thank you.
Thank you for letting me speak. I've been a resident of Glendale over 20 years. I live up by Brand Park, and what's happening, you guys will probably know it's like a racetrack up there between cars speeding. And so I've been advocating for quite some time now to try to get some speed humps, in particular on Bel Air Drive between Western and Grandview, which I understand that has been, it's met the criteria and it's been approved, but you know, I'm going to have to go through the petition process to get those done. But what I'm here, which I was really happy about, so thank you, I was really happy that we got that, because I think that's going to make a difference. The issue is Western between Kenneth and Bel Air. And the issue there is that is a death trap, meaning every day I drive that street, and what happens, it's not wide enough because you have parking on both sides of Western. And what happens is people speed and they refuse to yield. So it's like a game of chicken every single day. High rates of speed, people refusing to yield. And it's gotten to the point where it's just not safe. And so I had advocated for the speed bumps there. Apparently, according to the traffic engineering, it meets the criteria, meaning, you know, there's the car count, they track the speeding, so they verified all of that met the criteria. They went to the fire department. The fire department came back and said, no, it's an emergency response route, end of story. So why I'm appealing this is for a few reasons. One, there are already speed bumps on Western north of Bel Air, which is actually a block where it doesn't really even need it because the traffic stops. So all I'm asking is to extend the speed bumps 1 block south. They're already on Western. The other issue is that once the speed humps are on Bel Air going east, what is the fire department going to do? They can't go north because there's speed bumps already on Western, north of Bel Air, and they won't be able to go east because there's going to be speed bumps there now. So that's not really going to be a very good emergency response route anymore for them. So my suggestion was they've got other north-south streets they could take. They could do Sonora, they could do Grandview, fine, there's, you know, they've got other response routes that will ultimately probably work better for them because the speed bumps that are already on Western north of Bel Air, and the speed bumps that will be east on Bel Air. I just can't imagine what the fire department's going to do when they get to that corner. What are they going to do? They're going to have to go left towards Burbank. So it doesn't make sense to me to say, you know, that has to be an emergency response route. Now, if it does have to, for whatever reason, then why not the speed humps with the cutouts? So we can slow the traffic down. The fire department can get their speed bumps with the cutouts, and that's a good compromise. We've met the safety for everybody concerned. So, and the other thing I had posed to as an even third alternative, although less, I think, effective, would be this slow street program that apparently City Council had approved, which are basically, I can show you a picture right now. These are throughout the city of Glendale. And what they are, they're posts in the middle of the street that basically look like this. If I may show you. This would certainly help because I think it would be more effective I think it would certainly be more effective than what the traffic engineering department is proposing right now, which is just simply signage. Signage will not change anything in terms of providing a more safe situation. People will look at it, they'll keep speeding, it won't change their behavior ultimately. And you know, I'm frustrated because I've lived in Glendale a long time, and I just feel like too much is allowed to go on in terms of the car situation. And I hear it all the time coming down Grandview from Bram Park. I hear they go down my street 80 miles an hour from Bram Park. And I get it, law enforcement, they don't have the resources to be enforcing this. So I think we have to take some kind of structural approach to deter this behavior. And I respect the fact you got to balance the fire department's concerns as well, but I think we can't do it at the expense of the public safety, which I think is at serious risk in this one block. That's all I'm asking for. One block south of Bel Air, north of Kenneth, one block to have cutout speed humps on that street. And like I said, they already have them on Western north of Bel Air. So thank you very much for letting me talk.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, we have a short presentation by Mr. Sarkis Oganessian, our Deputy Public Works Director and City Engineer.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Imrani. Good evening again. Before you is the proposed traffic calming measures on Western Avenue. To give you a brief background on this item and what our department and our traffic section has done to date. So we received a request for traffic calming on Western Avenue to address the following concerns: excessive speeding on Western, and the fact that the street is not wide enough to accommodate unimpeded two-way traffic due to parking being allowed on both sides. The requested traffic calming measure was speed humps or speed lumps. The location is on Western Avenue between Kenneth Road and Bel Air Drive, and it's primarily it is only a residential zone. This is the aerial showing the residential households that are along this corridor. It's a field review that we completed. This is the northbound section of Western Avenue, and here is the southbound direction. So staff followed the procedures of the neighborhood traffic calming program and prepared a engineering analysis for the request. We did a screening evaluation. We looked at the street classification, and it met the street classification as a community collector, and it was located in a residential zone. We also did an engineering study, which encompassed 24-hour speed and volume traffic counts. We completed a field investigation to confirm all the roadway characteristics, the street width, the signs, striping, and geometry. And then we applied traffic calming criteria that's highlighted in the neighborhood traffic calming program. Additionally, we also took a look at the fire response routes that we are supposed to do as part of our study, and confirmed that Western Avenue between Kenneth Road to Bel Air Drive is a fire response route. So as a result of our traffic study and the summary, as you see in this table below, this location did meet the street classification. It is a community collector. It did achieve 85th percentile speeds for consideration. So the 85th percentile speeds were 33 miles per hour. Daily traffic volume was also met at 2,712 vehicles. However, it did not meet the primary emergency response route category. as confirmed by our fire department. Therefore, we did not proceed to circulate a petition to the requester for this section. So what do we recommend? As stipulated, obviously, in the neighborhood traffic calming program, speed humps and speed lumps do not meet the criteria, primarily because it is a emergency response route. And we recommend, alternatively, the installation of speed radar feedback signs that present your speed in real time, as well as the installation of two-way traffic signs because it is a 30-foot section of street. With that, I'd like to open up to any questions you may have.
I just have one question. The speed feedback radar signs and the two-way traffic warning signage, is that standard alternative when you do look at concerns about safety in vehicles and the speed humps?
The speed feedback signs are a tool in our toolkit. The two-way traffic signs are reserved for narrow streets primarily.
I have a question too. The cutouts that the applicant mentioned, is that an option here?
So in regards to speed lumps, and I'll let the fire department speak on that as well, because the roadway is only 30 feet wide, by the time you are able to design a speed lump that has the cutouts in between, it becomes in the way of the parked cars, because there's parking allowed on both sides of the street. So if you would imagine, when you have an 8-foot parking lane on each side, that's 16 feet. That only leaves you with 14 feet of real estate left to negotiate that lane. The cutouts are designed and they land in between that parking area. So there will be no room, or if there's no cars there, there may be room, but if there's cars there, then the cars will be straddling that speed lump and won't allow the fire department to use those cutouts as they're intended. So that's the primary reason why speed lumps are not recommended for streets that are less than 40 feet wide.
But they are used in Glendale now. I've seen them on other.
Commissioner, you have a question?
Yes. I have noticed those stop signs that they're lighted. It does make a big impact. We have seen them in North Glendale. I don't know if there's similar signs to that it says slow down and it's constantly lighted, and they're solar ones as well. Is that something that exists in your toolkit that we can implement in that area, that it's constantly flashing because it grabs attention? So is that a possibility?
Commissioner Odubegian, so this is a stretch of roadway that's located between two stopped approaches. So the stop signs wouldn't be effective. This is in between Bel Air and Kenneth. So you wouldn't be putting a stop sign in between that location.
I understand. I mean, is there signs that it says slow down and it's flashing constantly?
We don't have flashing slowdown signs in our toolkit. It's something we may be able to look at, but it's not a standard practice of ours.
I understand. I mean, we have done it in Montrose, and it had made a tremendous impact, and people had slowed down because we had people crossing the street, and they were having this issue of cars not stopping or not slowing down. Those are constantly flashing, and it attracts a lot of attention. So I don't know if that's even a possibility or not, but it might be something we might want to look into.
I would also like to note that the speed radar feedback signs do flash if you're going over the speed limit. So they do flash to garner your attention.
Thank you.
I meant to ask in her other point was about the bollards. Is the street too narrow? What was the issue with those slow street type bollards?
Commissioner Lester, we've implemented, per council direction, a pilot in a handful of streets that we've implemented slow streets. And on the narrower ones, we've also had the same problems in terms of the fire trucks basically being able to maneuver the turn where we install the bollards, as well as our own trash trucks. So some of them, we've had to remove those bollards, actually.
I can't remember, was there any case that the city tried mid-block, doing that in the mid-block? So that the turn isn't involved?
Most of the ones that we've, again, these are 12 segments or a handful of segments that we've done this for. And again, we specifically picked these in South Glendale because there were narrower streets because we wanted to test out the concept. And again, the majority that have had, that were narrower, we've had a lot of problems and complaints. So we've had to remove them.
So there wasn't any that were tried mid-block as a calming?
Most of them were at either end of the...
That's what I've seen, I'm just wondering. Okay.
Thank you. And are there any speakers?
There are no speakers at this time.
So it looks like the next step would be to call a motion, right?
That's
Okay.
correct.
So we're looking at this, given that this is a public hearing of an appeal, we're either doing a motion affirming or reversing staff's denial of the application. That's the first motion. And then the second motion would be whether we're recommending installation of the speed feedback radar signs and two-way traffic warning signs.
That's correct.
Okay. Do I have a first motion?
Chairperson Bonstein,
Yes.
we do have the fire department who did also
Absolutely.
want to make some comments. We didn't get to afford them that time, so I would like to
Please, come on up.
respectfully ask if we can do that.
Thank you. Once again, Brian Julian, Glendale Fire. Some of the points in this particular case I think are really important to note are, first of all, we don't take it lightly. It'd be very easy for us to just say, don't put anything for traffic calming, it slows us down. But in this particular case, it is a main route for us. Station 27 is at the bottom of the hill at Glen Oaks and Western, and that is a main route for them to travel north into the residential area. The point of having speed humps, bumps, or with cutouts on some of the streets that traverse Western are really not comparable because Western is a slope going up. So we have fire apparatus engines that are weighing over 40,000 pounds, fire trucks that are just under 70,000 pounds. And even with cutouts, you have to come to a much slower speed to negotiate those. Without the cutouts, you have to come to basically a complete stop. So when you do that and then get each axle of the apparatus over and then try to accelerate to a normal response speed again, you lose quite a bit of time on each one of those humps. Conservatively, say 10 seconds. It doesn't sound like much, but over the course of multiple humps, you can easily, on a response, lose 40 seconds to a minute. I think it's really important to realize with a response, right, there's certain elements to that response. The call coming in being processed, people getting on the apparatus and moving, getting going. We can't make up any time on the road. We can only drive so fast. The DMV requirement is driving with due regard for safety. So even on the flat, we can't make up that time that's lost with those things. Especially going uphill, we're losing even more time. In that particular area, because it is residential, I think it's important to note that seconds really do matter in responses in that neighborhood. When it comes to a fire, a structure fire, depending on the contents of the house, a fire can double in size in every 30 seconds, and then it's exponential from there. In the case of a respiratory arrest or cardiac arrest, I mean, people can start to have permanent brain damage in 4 to 6 minutes. So you add a minute into that response with all those other elements. The standard by NFPA is a 4-minute response. That's the benchmark we go for. You can see that 30 seconds actually can make a difference in that type of response. So while it is a significant issue on Western, we understand that. That is one street that why we've taken that position that we really can't see those types of things that impede our ability for a timely response. So, thank you.
I had a question for, oh, may I? I'm sorry. I need to ask. For staff, why were the humps granted north of Kenneth on this street then, if this is the case?
Sorry about that. The speed humps at the location north of this were installed in 2012. Actually, the fire department, as well as staff at that time, public works staff at that time, were against the installation of those speed humps. It did come before the Transportation and Parking Commission at that time, and the commissioners at that time voted to modify the request and install 3 out of 4 speed humps that would have originally been designed for that length of street.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, I'll just make a comment. I also live in Northwest Glendale on a north-south going street, and I know about the speeding there. I definitely recognize the comments from the fire department because, again, we get back to this issue of life safety, but, you know, I have 2 small kids who, them running down the driveway feels like it could be, I mean, we run, we yell. It's so dangerous for them to get anywhere near that street. So I just want to say, I wanted to kind of just convey my understanding of the situation there. The speeding on those northwest streets really is bad.
Thank you. With that, is there a motion?
I will move to affirm staff's denial of resident application for the installation of speed humps and adopt a motion instead recommending installation of speed feedback radar signs and two-way traffic warning signage.
Sorry, if we could take those one at a time.
Okay.
As they are separate, but we have a motion to affirm staff's denial currently on the floor.
Then thank you. I will move to affirm staff's denial of the resident application for the installation of speed lumps on Western Avenue between Kenneth Road and Bel Air Drive.
Thank you.
I'll second it.
I'll take roll call. Chairperson Bonstein,
Yes.
Commissioner Lester,
Yes.
Commissioner Ordubegyan,
Yes.
Commissioner Avagyan,
Yes.
Commissioner Amirian.
Yes.
Thank you.
At this time, I will also move that we recommend the installation of speed feedback radar signs and two-way traffic warning signage in areas and increments that are recommended by staff.
I'll second.
I'll take roll call. Chairperson Bonstein,
Yes.
Commissioner Lester,
Yes.
Commissioner Avagyan,
Yes.
Commissioner Ordubegyan,
Yes.
Commissioner Amirian.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. What is the next item on the agenda?
Item 8, informational report. However, we do not have an informational report.
Thank you. And the next item on the agenda?
Item 9, oral communication. Discussion is limited to item not a part of this agenda. Each speaker is allowed 5 minutes. The commission may question the speaker, but there will be no debate or decision.
Thank you. And I'm seeing no speakers. Are there any that have called in?
No.
Okay. And the next item on the agenda?
Item 9, commission staff comments updates.
Item 10.
Item 10, adjournment.
Tennis commissions.
I'll move to adjourn.
Thank you. We have a motion to adjourn. I'll second it. Are we good?
Madam Chair, we were just correcting the number. The item 10 is the commission staff communication, and 11 is adjournment. So we were just correcting the numbering for the record.
Excellent, thank you.
And staff doesn't have any comments unless the commissioners have any comments.
Thank you very much. Meeting adjourned at 8:59.